Hey everyone, John Lorden here. Welcome to another episode of Itchy Mysteries. This one being recorded for March 8th, 2018. Hope you're having a nice week so far. Last year, I reviewed a movie. I really liked it. If I remember right, it wound up on my top 10 called The 7-5, and it was about police corruption, a specific instance of police corruption that was going on in New York. It was a very open documentary. People were being very honest about the types of things that they did. There was a few of the officers that were basically running kind of a gang within the police department that were part of this film and have written books about this case. And it just really gave a very interesting insight into how this type of corruption can happen, and a very honest answer to the question of, does this type of corruption happen? Now I have found a new documentary that is probably a good bookend if you consider the 7-5 the start of the series. This one is called The Force, and this was produced in 2017, is directed by Peter Nix. And let me give you the very brief plot summary from IMDb on this. The Force goes inside an embattled urban police department struggling to rebuild trust in one of America's most violent yet promising cities. This is about the Oakland Police Department, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't even know about. I haven't really been following the news on what they've been going through, but essentially for the past, I guess, 13, 14 years at this point, they have been in threat of the federal government just completely taking them over. They're already having federal oversight that's been going on there for all of this time. And they've been trying to implement changes and to regain trust with their communities. And this documentary there's so many different levels that are at play with this documentary. It focuses quite a bit on African American and police relations. It does touch on Black Lives Matter, but doesn't. It's strange. It doesn't try to explain it or doesn't go into the history of it too much. It really just uses it as an example of what the public commentary is between citizens and police officers and some of the disputes that we're having with law enforcement and trying to ask them to treat citizens better and develop new policies and things among that nature. It touches on body cams. There's a lot of kind of hot topics that are thrown into The Force, but I don't know how to explain it. It doesn't really focus on any one of those as being a particular problem or solution. It really just kind of notes its place at this point in time. It's a very interesting way for a documentary to go about this, because typically when I'm watching a documentary, I'm watching for biases of the filmmakers to come through. And when I was watching this one, I felt like at first I'm like, oh my God, this is a fluff piece for the police department. Oh, look how great they're doing. And then it gave me some very real world examples of issues that they face while they're out there trying to do their work, the types of things that are taught to new cadets as they're coming up into the police department. And I was really getting a different perspective than I've had before. And quite honestly, I think a documentary is amazing when it does that, when it gives us a new perspective and some new information. And The Force really works at that level. Then when you think it's going kind of in that direction as maybe being a pro-law enforcement piece, it swings the other way very sharply. And then you see some extremely well thought out arguments coming from the public about what is happening, about how the police are treating them. And it doesn't try to solve this. It really is showing you two extreme arguments at extreme opposite ends of the spectrum, and the people that are trying to get together in the middle and have some conversation, some meaningful conversation to make things better. And there is this kind of hint of despair that's going on through all this, because you'll see footage from, I believe it's back in the 1970s, where they're essentially trying to do the same thing. They have police that are having community forums, and the community is so happy that they can finally tell their complaints directly to the higher ups of these police departments. But then you realize, wait, they've been trying to do that since the 70s, and obviously these things haven't gotten much better. And there's this underlying darkness to this piece because the whole time I was sitting there going, I'm appreciating that they're trying to change this culture. You know, they have some numbers that seem pretty promising in terms of, less shootings that they're having to do, less times that they're pulling out their weapon overall. But there's this underlying tone of they're only doing all this because they are basically being watched by the federal government, and people are going to be losing their jobs left and right. And they're kind of behaving while, this big entity is watching over them. The question is, can they keep behaving for long? If we're truly talking about a cultural issue within police departments, not just in Oakland, but across the nation. If we're talking about a critical kind of design flaw in how these units are operating, is it enough that the federal government is watching this one particular police department? And I'm not going to spoil the ending for you. But it does do a very good job at letting you know what has happened and where this situation is currently. Like I said, this isn't a documentary that's going to have all the answers. This is more of a documentary that is raising some very tough questions. I was really conflicted watching this documentary, but I have to say it was a conflict that I appreciate. It was making me think on both sides of this case. And seeing it from both of those perspectives. And I think that's pretty much an amazing thing for a documentary like this to do. I'm not the only person touting this film. It has won a few awards. It is the winner of the Golden Gate Award at the San Francisco International Film Festival. It was nominated for Best Documentary Feature, but it actually won for Bay Area Documentary Feature. Of course, Oakland is very close to San Francisco. Sarasota Film Festival, it was nominated for Best Documentary Feature. Stockholm Film Festival, also nominated for Best Documentary. At Sundance in 2017, it was nominated for documentary for the Grand Jury Prize. Didn't win that one, but it did get a directing award specifically for Peter Nix for documentary. And I think it's really well deserved. In terms of how it looks, there are some really interesting shots, but it's really the access to people on both sides of this conversation. The camera is at the right places at the right times. There is one segment in particular that some people might think it's a shooting. It's basically where video from a shooting, an officer-involved shooting, is being shown to some cadets, and then they're having a conversation about it. That one particular video segment is kind of tough to watch, but outside of that, it's not particularly graphic. Gives you some interesting insight into the types of things that are being told to cadets as they're coming up in this particular department, and some of their concerns about how they feel about keeping themselves safe. I might have shaken my head at a couple of the comments I heard from them, but you can't deny the honesty of those comments. And we know this is a very tough job for anyone to take on. So it's just, I don't know. It left me with so many questions. I feel like I'm just running all over the place with unfortunately, I have this thing in my head where I want to fix things. So I've got like all these different thoughts about, well, can we have them spend less time on writing up reports if we have good technology in place? Like if we're using those body cameras all the time instead of having them flipped on and off. If we have body camera footage, why are we having them write up a report? I'll tell you, in terms of what I want to look at for understanding the truth of something that happened, I would certainly rather go with footage than an officer's interpretation of the events that he's written up hours after the fact when he's sitting in an office somewhere. It just, I don't know, it's really made me think about all the different problems around this, and I think it's a really good piece because of that. I really didn't notice anything particular with the music, which, as I always tell you guys, is usually a good thing. Didn't pull me away from the material for being too weird or too loud or anything like that. Some pretty interesting shots that do happen with cinematography, but overall, it's just really compelling information that is going to throw you around a little bit emotionally, I think. Not the easiest thing for everyone to watch. I think some people will really appreciate being challenged by this film. I think some people will shy away because of how extreme the conversations are. But for me, it was right up my alley, and I really think it's a good piece of work, and I think many of you out there will appreciate it for being that as well. So I caught it on Netflix. It is available on Netflix here in the US. It runs an hour and 20 minutes long. Right now on IMDb, it's rating a 6.8. I would take that up. I say this is at least a 7.5 for me. It's a little bit of a tough watch. I might have given it a little more if it wasn't so emotionally taxing. That's probably the one downside to it, but it's an important dialogue, and I think it represents that dialogue pretty well. So do yourself a favor. If you have a free hour and a half or hour and 20 minutes and you've got an open mind and an open heart, I think you might want to check out The Force. Thanks for hanging out with me on this episode of Itchy Mysteries. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you back here on the Lord and Arch channel tomorrow for a new Brain Scratch. See you there.